Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Rachel Carson, and I am a Senior Research Fellow and Executive Manager of the Family Law, Family Violence and Elder Abuse Research Team here at the Australian Institute of Family Studies. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Wiradjuri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the lands here in Naarm, Melbourne, where we are speaking to you from today. I also pay my respects to Elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to Elders and First Australians online with us today. Today's topic is supporting children and young people bereaved by domestic homicide. I would like to acknowledge people with lived experience of family violence. This can be a very difficult topic to talk and hear about. Please everyone take care while listening, and if you or someone you know needs support, there is a list of services and contact information in the Handouts tab in the GoToWebinar platform. Domestic homicide is a traumatic experience that has immediate and long-term effects on a child's social, emotional and cognitive development. Although supporting these children is critical, there is limited evidence-based guidelines to determine who is best placed to care for them. Decisions about their lives fall to decision makers who may have little or no input from the children themselves. In today's discussion, we won't be sharing any graphic descriptions of violence or homicide. We will be focusing on what is known about the prevalence of domestic homicides, understanding people's experiences and the impacts of bereavement from domestic homicide, and what practitioners can do in their role to support these children and families. While preventing domestic homicides is a critically important topic, today's discussion will largely focus on understanding the effects. Before we begin our discussion and introduce our panellists, I have a little bit of housekeeping. There will be a live Q&A session at the end of our discussion today. Questions can be submitted via the questions box in the GoToWebinar dashboard. This webinar is being recorded. It will be available in 2 weeks from this webinar, and it will be available on the AIFS website under the webinar banner. And you can subscribe to AIFS News for more information also. In relation to the reading and resources related to this topic, the references that are made to resources in this webinar will be also available in the Handouts section of the GoToWebinar dashboard. Also, if you have time, please complete the short feedback survey at the end of the webinar. Now I would like to introduce our panellists. Professor Ailey Shisht is based at the Melbourne School of Population and Global Health and studies how people and families deal with traumatic experiences. Since 2010, she has led a program of research looking at the impact of domestic homicide. Catherine Joy, whose pronouns are they, them, lost their mother at the hands of their father when they were a few months old. They have been a co-investigator in Ava's research for several years. They are also involved in a documentary, Killjoy, which will be released next year. And finally, Dr. Jo Tucci, who is CEO of the Australian Childhood Foundation and the inaugural chairperson of the National Centre for Action on Child Sexual Abuse. He is a registered psychologist and social worker with over 30 years' experience in the field of child abuse. And now we may begin our discussion. Ava, I wonder if you could provide an overview of the nature and prevalence of children and young people who are bereaved by domestic homicide based on your research and how this may be considered in the Australian context.
Yeah, big question to start with, Rachel. With regard to prevalence, the issue is that we actually don't have reliable, centrally collected information in Australia. We do have information from research that we, among others, did in the Netherlands, where we looked at a period of 10 years and 256 children had lost a biological parent due to homicide, domestic homicide. Now, the Netherlands is a smaller country than Australia, literally and population-wise, obviously. And our definition was relatively narrow, I would say. So if you think of children who lose a step-parent, children who lose a parent who has gone missing, children without it being recorded as a domestic violence-related death or missing, children who lose a parent due to violence, but through suicide of that parent. So our guesstimate has been that we're talking about 1,000 children and young people in Australia for a period of 20 years. Hopefully that's an overestimate, but it's, yeah, if we want to address support for children and young people in their environment, we obviously need to know who we need to look at and after. In terms of the impact, we know a bit more, and that, as you already introduced, like, is obviously across all aspects of life. You know, saying that somebody's life is disrupted is clearly, and
Yes.
you know, never captures the extent of that disruption well enough. But to indicate a few things. So in most cases, the homicide happens at home. Many children are either witnesses or witness the crime scene afterwards. Because home is the crime scene, they have to move, and of course, you know, the loss of their parents is already there, but then also the loss of home. If you have to move home, you might need to move schools. If you move schools, and with all the media attention in many of these cases, it also means that your whole social life is incredibly disrupted. So apart from what we all might think of in terms of mental health impact of such a horrible experience, of many of these children have experienced domestic violence in the lead up to the homicide as well. So there's a history before this major event, and the actual direct loss of parents in that time. There's this whole impact on all the other domains of their life throughout their life. It's, you know, it's not that one event and then it's the way up afterwards, and a story of recovery. What we hear from the people we've spoken with is it's non-linear. It's some of the moments when it's extra difficult, again, maybe predictable. I mean, there are some moments, like, for example, when people have their own children, it might make a lot of sense that it is a clear milestone. But there may also be unpredictable moments when it comes up, and I'm sure Catherine may have examples of that.
Yes. And Ava, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what your research shows us about what caregivers need in this context.
Yeah, sure. Support, just as much as the children and young people. Like, a number of caregivers, as you can imagine, are relatives of the victim and of the children. So a substantial number are grandparents from the victim's side. In most cases, that means they've lost their daughter. And so they already are dealing with an incredible loss, grief, traumatic experience, guilt feelings that are related to that. Plus then looking after children who similarly have been through this horrible experience. When you're also no longer an energetic 20 or 30-year-old, means that again, it's an enormous task to do that, and to know, you know, how to read a child's needs after trauma and after grief, how to respond to that, and to have that capacity while you're grieving yourself is really, really a big ask that we should be supporting, not only in the direct aftermath, but in the longer term. And it also applies to caregivers who are not related. Also for them, it's understanding what a child needs and supporting a child through that is incredibly challenging, even if you are not dealing with your own mental health impact.
Yes. And In your research, Ava, are you able to tell us what you found about the inclusion of children's voices, particularly in the Australian context?
Yes. Yeah, we've come across a real lack of inclusion of children and young people's voice, in the sense that many of the people we've spoken with have felt that they haven't had a say in the decisions that are so fundamental for their life afterwards. So think of well, where they would live afterwards, with whom, whether if the parent who, if the perpetrator is a parent, whether they should have any contact with that perpetrator, and if so, how much, in what format, etc. About the support they need, decisions around that, and also regarding the story that is being told, for example, at school. How much of a say, of agency have they had? And so we know with a traumatic event is characterized by not being in control. It's one of the core elements of a traumatic event, is you're totally out of control of the situation. And yeah, that makes it extra important that, apart from the whole issue that children have a right to be heard and influence matters that affect them, but also in terms of recovery post-trauma, you would want to provide them as much agency as is possible. And our participants have, provided many examples of not having that situation. And also, obviously, it's ironic that we have a panel where we talk about kids again and don't have a young person on the panel, which is often, there are sometimes good reasons, but also, it's problematic that they don't get sufficient say when they need to. And similarly, I feel awkward talking about this. Well, Catherine, of course, is the person with their own experience.
Yes, and Catherine, you may wish to join the discussion at this point in terms of this question about children's voices and the extent to which they're heard, but also to draw you into the discussion in terms of telling us a little bit about the differences between bereavement from domestic homicide and other types of homicidal parental loss. And I wonder if you do see there to be a difference, and if so, what that might be.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Rachel. I really appreciate that question. I think partly because it gives me an opportunity to talk about grief, and specifically disenfranchised grief, which is something that is kind of a term, I guess, that I came across in my late 20s when I was studying social work. And I'm so grateful for that understanding and the naming of such a huge part of my experience, and I think a huge part of the experience of a lot of children and young people and adults who have been bereaved in this particular way. I guess just for those who aren't familiar with the term, in a sort of simple way, it's defined as a loss that hasn't been or cannot be openly acknowledged, socially accepted or recognized, or like publicly mourned. So for me, I've always felt that like there was sort of this politicized element to this kind of loss and to this kind of healing as well, that sometimes doesn't accompany potentially other kinds of losses. I do want to say, just before I get into that too much, I feel like I can't really speak about like disenfranchised grief without naming the immeasurable loss and grief that was brought about by colonization and continues to this day, and just naming the fact that I'm living on stolen land, the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I really would like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people listening today. I think that there are so many ongoing injustices, so much loss and grief, and we should, all of us, feel rage at that, and at the very least be naming that, and trying to find ways to disrupt systems that are silencing the harms being done to First Nations people in this colony, including like deaths in custody and missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse people. And as Amy Maguire says, they are often like violently disappeared, they're not just missing. So I think that that's important to speak about in this context as well. Like when there's injustice as part of a death or deaths, and when there's violence, there's so little room to grieve because there's so many other things to navigate, I guess, and so many barriers. And sometimes I feel like grief can be seen as this sort of like afterthought, like when we have time, and there's never time because there's all of these other things. And I think that grief in these circumstances isn't just what we do, like when someone dies, or even what like physiologically happens to our bodies in the wake of a violent loss, but I see grief and mourning as kind of preventative. Like grieving allows rage and sorrow to fuel us into action to prevent ongoing harm, and it's a way for communities to like revolt in times of injustice. So it feels really important to speak about grief both as necessary to life in and of itself, to just like part of living and loving and losing people and things that we love, but also in how we heal ourselves and communities. And I just want to say by heal, I don't mean like fix or get better. I mean to like come back to ourselves and to be connected to others and to this land, and to be in solidarity with others in this kind of larger fight for liberation and justice. So I think that in circumstances like this, for kids, for anyone, but for children, one injustice that I feel like I experienced and have witnessed is this assumption that children don't grieve, or that they grieve less, or that the way that they grieve is somehow so different to be seen as like less worthy of space or time or care, or just confusing. So like, let's not go near it. So, you know, in that sense, children are disenfranchised grievers. And just as an aside, I guess, you know, I had a lot of people, you know, really like well-meaning extended family and as well as sort of virtual strangers, including a therapist that I saw briefly in my early 20s, say to me that I was lucky that I was 3 months old when I lost my mother, because I didn't know her and I didn't have anything to lose, really, and that I wasn't aware of all the trauma and the violence. And I really internalized that for like a long time, you know, this sense that I wasn't even really like worthy of grieving her because I didn't know her. So I think that's a way that, you know, children are disenfranchised in that sense. And children in this situation are also experiencing a disenfranchised loss and losses, you know, that, so like losses that carry a lot of shame. For me, you know, like my father was in prison, and my mother being like a victim of family violence and homicide, and there's this sort of shame surrounding that, and trauma, and you know, that trauma really isolates people, and the stigma and silencing and not knowing others who share this experience, and not being witnessed, it's like hugely isolating. And I would say that it's also an experience that, you know, I guess that those in power and that systems of oppression would like us to see as an isolated experience as well. So, and that's just not true. You know, we know that women are being killed and are dying weekly. We know children are being killed in their families. We know that queer and trans folks are being killed and killing themselves. We know Aboriginal people are being killed by the state. You know, we know all of these things, and none of these things are isolated experiences just happening to individuals here and there, and nor are they unconnected from each other. So for me, part of the importance of like naming and making space for grief is that this is where we collectivize. This is where we say enough, you know, like stop killing us, stop killing our children, stop killing our mothers, like stop, you know. So that feels like, yeah, a really important kind of part of it all. I just wanted to say this quote because I think it kind of encapsulates this, by Harsha Walia, who's a South Asian activist in Canada, who says that in a time when so many lives are considered ungrievable, as coined by Judith Butler, grieving is a politically necessary act. Vulnerability and tenderness for each other and public grievability for life itself are some of the most profound acts of community resistance. And I just feel like that's really moving. You know, I feel like I've been grieving my whole life. It's such a dominant experience in my life. You know, I was so young when my mother was killed, and the loss of her has sort of shaped my life, and the loss of, you know, that fragmentation of my family. My father was in prison, and my brothers and I were separated. And then my father was out of prison, and I lost the family that I was with in some ways. And there's this kind of loss of trust in family in and of itself, you know, as something that we see as this stable foundation. It's just not something I experienced. And there was so much silence around my mother's death. And, you know, I saw all the ways that the adults around me were denied that right to fully grieve for her, and how that left them ill-equipped to hold the grief of her children, for me and my brothers. So, and not just the grief, but like hold the rage and the profound sorrow and despair of losing a parent before you even know them, and, you know, in such a horrifying way. So I feel like because there was no kind of room for that grief, no language around that, no justice or accountability, we were left on our own with it. And I think the impact of that is ongoing. I remember feeling,
Well,
yeah, sorry, I just
go
like
ahead, Catherine. No, I don't want to interrupt you, Catherine. Go ahead.
Oh, I remember that feeling for a lot of my childhood and a lot of my adulthood, that sort of absence and disconnection from the world and others and myself, and that it kind of cut me off from connecting deeply to people for a really, really long time, because these losses are so relational. You know, they sever so many attachments all at once. And that's why I feel so strongly about the need to connect with others and to grieve collectively for the harms that are done to so many of us in different ways. Yeah, I guess I can talk, I don't know, I can talk a little bit about like ritual as well, and the healing around choosing to publicly mourn, I guess. Anyway, I could go on for a long time, I guess.
Well, it's been very helpful to have you talk to us about, you know, this disenfranchised grief that you and your brothers experienced, and you've started to talk to those impacts that this has had on you, of being bereaved by domestic homicide. And we've gotten a glimpse into that last question that we touched on with Ava about the extent to which her research has shown about the inclusion, or should I say lack of inclusion, of children's voices in the context of decision making in this space. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little more about the long-term impacts into adulthood that you've experienced by being bereaved by domestic homicide.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many long-term impacts, I suppose. I think that part of it, I mean, I guess there's the impact of being bereaved, which would have been, you know, awful either way. But there's also like the impact of not being supported in what happened. And so sometimes I feel like what I experienced and what I've been living with is not just the impact of what happened, but the impact of like all of the ways that I think that we were failed by systems and you know, a lot of the people around me were also failed, and therefore, just because of not having their own support, sort of weren't there in the way that we needed, you know. So I think that there's a combination of a sort of feeling of like failure of the adults around us to take care of us and to protect us and to sort of like listen and offer the kind of support that we needed because they weren't getting it either. And then there's just long-term kind of system failure, or the cynic in me is like, well, a lot of the systems are working as they're kind of supposed to, which is just that they're not broken, they're just functioning as they're meant to, which means that a lot of people, marginalized people, are getting kind of left behind. But yeah, I feel like obviously mental health, you know, that's something I have always had to kind of manage due to, you know, the trauma, but also the trauma not being seen or supported. Something that I do feel quite like passionate about is the fact that like getting support, access to support is so difficult. It's expensive and it's just inaccessible in like so many ways. And even if there is support available in some ways, you have to know about it in the first place, or the people around you have to know about it, and so few people do, especially if you're a child. I mean, you have only the amount of information that people are willing to tell you, but also that the adults in your life know. So I think that it's a combination of not knowing what's out there, but also there being just nowhere near enough support out there for children and young people who have experienced this, and that has like long-term impacts on so many things, housing and employment, and like just there's been many times in my life where, you know, and I have a lot of privilege in a lot of ways, but that I've just had to choose between, you know, mental health support, which I desperately needed, and being able to feed myself, you know, and that's just such an awful position to be in for anybody. So yeah, I mean, there are so many things, but I do think that like the fact that it is just so difficult to get the support that you need is a huge one. Like it's, yeah, it's so expensive
So
to get therapy.
yes.
With one thing.
So given that in the context of inaccessibility of supports and that lack of support for family and carers who are looking after you, what would you like practitioners and service providers to know when they are supporting children who are bereaved by domestic homicide?
I mean, I think that firstly there needs to be just more kind of inbuilt support so that it doesn't fall to one practitioner having to go above and beyond, which is kind of what we've heard about in the research and my own experience of like, oh, I'm so lucky I had this one person who just went way above their job description to make sure that I had all of these things. I don't think it should fall to someone to have to do that. I think that there needs to be support embedded for practitioners and in organizations, so that it's not just like you have to take all of this time outside of your work. I also think that there's some real, I mean, every case is different, and all children aren't just like a homogenous group, you know, like there's different barriers that different children will face because of their backgrounds and situations, and also just personalities and temperaments and all of the things. So really, you know, we talk about it so much that's come out of the research, and we just, every case is different. So you just have to listen to what, you have to really value children's voices and listen to them, and try not to make too many assumptions. I think that there were so many assumptions made about how I would feel about my dad or my mum or the situation that were often really incorrect, and or that were just so much more complicated. You know, a lot of people like to tell me how I should feel, but actually it's such a complex thing when the person that has harmed your parent is your other parent. It's you don't suddenly stop needing that other parent or being attached to that other parent or potentially loving that other parent. So I guess I think it's important for people to know that and to not make kind of assumptions about how they think they would feel. It's just it's so complicated. Yeah.
Thank you, Catherine. That's
yeah.
I think I speak for everyone who's listening today, and our panelists as well, that it's been so very valuable to hear your insights and the importance of enfranchising the child, their voice and their grief in this context, and hearing about the gaps in service provision in the last part of our discussion leads me to move to our final panellist, Jo Tucci, in relation to these gaps and limitations. And Jo, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the current gaps in the systems and services that are designed to support children who have been bereaved by domestic homicide.
Thanks, Rachel. I mean, I could probably listen to Catherine talk for a lot longer, because there's so much that you help us to understand when you just share your experiences of your life, Catherine. It's very powerful and very moving just to always have a conversation with you. So I'm sure on behalf of everyone that's listening, it's a big note of appreciation for you being willing and exploring your experience in such an open forum. Catherine said it, Rachel. The system's fragmented. We start with seeing children as a secondary victim in this experience. They're not considered an equal victim. And I use the word victim, you know, for effect. And when I say secondary, they're sort of seen as the afterthought. Catherine said it herself. Catherine said it. The afterthought is that for children, grief is a process that is frightening for adults to go to. It's time limited. We have these assumptions about how children grieve, how young people grieve, and what the expectation is about how that grief becomes resolved. And even talking about it that way is an assumption that is very, very adult-centric. I think that the systems don't offer the view of a child in these circumstances across their life course. They don't see them as needing support holistically across all areas of their life. And so you might be lucky and get some therapeutic support, but you're unlikely to get some specific support in school, so when you're going through school, or you might not get any support when you become an adolescent and you're looking about your options and planning proactively about what am I going to do next with my life and education or employment. So we tend to compartmentalise the needs of children according to what the services are that are delivered to them, as distinct from what is it that children actually need. And I think that children and young people whose parent has been killed, they require someone to accompany them throughout their life, both informal networks of support that can do that, carers who can do that, but also the formal systems of support that can do that. And we don't have that. I mean, we have children, young people services, we have family services, we have adult services, we have mental health services, we have housing services. Like where our service system is all built around silos. And what we're talking about is children experiencing their life in a way that has been affected by to call it a significant loss is again an underestimate. It's an indescribable loss. If we were wanting to be as accurate as possible, we can't describe the loss on behalf of children and young people. Catherine can come much closer to being able to describe that loss because they've been through it. But as the practitioners who are working in this field, we have to believe, or we have to start from the starting point that the loss is indescribable and listen. Not make the assumptions that you're lucky enough because you were 3 months old and you didn't know your mum. So the grief will only be passing. I've heard Catherine talk about it, and I know from our work that there's a comparative moment all the time. I wonder what my mum would have thought of this situation. I wonder what mum would say to me now. I mean, they're questions that adults have when they lose a significant person in their life. That's how we start to make sense of it. But I think it's another layer when that person has the parent, your mum, has been taken away from you through violence, and as a result, all of the things that Catherine said are at play. That it's very difficult for anyone to talk about it. There's shame and stigma associated with it. There's preferences to kind of put it aside and not open it up because we don't know how to talk about it with the neighbour or with a family friend. And so children are left alone in that process. I really think that if we were going to design a system for children and young people affected by this, by domestic homicide, we would involve them in the design and involve survivors in the design, but we would also have to take a life course understanding of their needs and be able to know that the service system needs to flex up and down according to the needs at particular points in that young person's development and into their adulthood. It's not good enough that Catherine had to choose between a meal and mental health support. I mean, what planet do we live on where that is a choice? That's not a choice. That's a broken system. That it's an outcome of a broken system. So, and at other levels, we know that kinship carers, who effectively is what we're talking about, these are kin, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, who step into the breach, have all sorts of financial, social, relational needs in looking after these children, the children that have been placed, come into their care, and they're not getting the support or the understanding and the knowledge that they need to be able to really respond to these children in a way that meets these unmet needs that they're carrying with them as a result of the trauma and the loss. So, we effectively let children down, and we're letting them down at so many levels that in order for us to really fix this, we need to start again and say, what's the system that we need to design for?
Thank you, Jo. That was very helpful to have that insight from your practice perspective, and I like the image that you have of the practitioner walking alongside with the child or young person in this process and supporting them to have a voice, together with the idea that children should be co-designing these services with practitioners to ensure that they meet their needs. Also relevant to our discussion today, I'd like to provide some information from the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia website about the critical incident list that the court has established. This list is for family law applications that are filed on or after the 6th of June 2022 in circumstances where there is no parent available to care for a child or children as a result of death, including domestic homicide, critical injury or incarceration relating to family violence, where there are no existing family law, state or territory child welfare orders in place which relate to the child or children's care arrangements with the non-parent, or allocating parental responsibility of the children to a non-parent, and orders are urgently to enable appropriate arrangements to be made. And in these circumstances, the court can make orders about where the children live, as well as orders for parental responsibility, which will enable non-parent carers to make appropriate arrangements for children in a timely way, including enrolling the children in school, organising and consenting to medical treatment, etc. So the court acknowledges the extraordinary challenges families and children face in these circumstances, and a key objective of this critical incident list is to facilitate this fast access to the court to assist families during these times of crisis. Applications are accepted into the critical incident list, are then allocated to a first listing date before the judge in charge of this list within 7 business days, subject to a demand and availability of judicial resourcing. So movements towards a service system that is better able to respond in a timely and effective way. We're now going to move to live questions from our audience for the remainder of our time together today. And may I begin with a question that you each may wish to respond to, and that is, what is the availability of support groups for people who are impacted by domestic homicide? And Jo, maybe we could begin with you.
Well, if you ask Catherine, they'll tell you that there's none. There's none. And in fact, one of the goals of our collaboration is to try to figure out how we might be able to do this, how we might be able to establish it. So, Catherine, you answer. I think your experience is much more relevant.
I mean, I know that there are a few general sort of homicide victim support groups in a few states, not specifically for domestic homicide, but more broadly. But I also know that these are pretty under-resourced and often started by victim survivors themselves who just were looking and saw the gap. So I know there are a few here and there in different states that are trying to fill that gap in some way, but there aren't any that I know of. If anyone's watching that's like, there is, I would love to know. But from what we've all seen and heard, and my experience is that there are no specific support groups for children or adults who have been bereaved by domestic homicide, which I just think is, I mean, I find that so unbelievable, really, that that's still the case now. I know that growing up, that was something I really wanted and have looked for a really, really long time. And it's kind of, I guess, come to this point where I think I'm just going to have to start it with some people, but which is really hard as well, because that's something that I would still like, you know, myself, like not to necessarily have to start something, just to actually be able to go and experience that kind of support. And I feel really lucky that throughout this research that we've been doing, I have met and been able to interview and connect with a number of people who have had this experience, and that just in itself has been incredible. And so just being able to sit and have a conversation with a few people about a number of different things, but just to be in the same space, to kind of have those moments of like, oh yeah, exactly, you know, just cannot be underestimated how important, and still, like, even now where I feel like in a lot of ways I have a lot of support, there's nothing quite like sitting with someone who really understands this particular experience. So yeah, it's so needed, but unfortunately doesn't really exist.
Ava, I wonder if you might be able to tell us a little bit about the experiences of children from diverse backgrounds. We've heard from Catherine about the acknowledgement of First Nations children and women in these circumstances. Are you able to talk to the experiences of children from core backgrounds, or First Nations families, or children or families with disability?
Really important question. Unfortunately, we have very little information about children from a range of marginalized backgrounds. And that is also partially, I think, we're based in but also colleague researchers, many of us are based in white institutions, and with a lack of centralized information about people who have been affected, we don't find each other really well. And I totally understand that not everybody would want to trust a research team that is based in such a white institution that has, you know, inflicted harm on people historically. So one thing that really struck me with the Dutch research was that we knew that the population of children that were affected, and so the whole group, and we also knew who we eventually interviewed for our qualitative in-depth interviews, and that was not the same proportion of children from migrant backgrounds, for example. And clearly there, through also our more informal conversations with families, my sense was really that we were able to connect with families for interviews, for example, through our clinical services there. And that's where we are missing, well, we're not providing the support that we need to be providing to families from migrant and refugee backgrounds. In this case, in the Netherlands, slightly different from Australia, of course, but all kinds of marginalized backgrounds who, as Joe said, like those services are often designed around the people who provide the services rather than the people who are expected to receive the services. So similar with the research, there's still really a lot to do. I wanted to pick up on two things that were said before, if you don't mind.
Of course.
One was assumptions were mentioned a couple of times, both by Catherine and by Joe, and that really resonated with me because what we've seen, and you know, Catherine and I have been talking about these things a lot over time as well, is that we often assume that siblings will have similar stances with regard to what they need or what they want, and that our research really clearly shows that that is not the case, and also other people's research shows that of, you know, naturally siblings often have different ages and are at different developmental stages and have different perspectives. So we've literally come across siblings where you know, one felt at home at the new home and the other didn't, or where one did want to have contact with a betrayed parent in some way and the other did not, or wasn't sure. We've literally had like the whole spectrum within one family. And again, I think Catherine mentioned this, Joe, I forgot. It's lots of factors, including people's personalities and personal preferences. So that would be one thing for me, also for practitioners listening, that we really don't want to assume anything actually in that case. And that's why we've been so focused on how can we be child and young person centered in what we do research wise, as well as in practice. And that brings me actually to a resource that we've made together with Catherine for practitioners about the various aspects of experiences of young people in the aftermath of a domestic homicide. And it's a tool for reflective practice in a way of, these are, you know, it's a combination of text and descriptions and videos. It's freely available online. Short videos and reflective questions afterwards about how we might be, you know, as tuned in as possible to what a young person needs. And that sometimes that is about asking, but it can also be about observing. You know, for example, when a young person or a child responds in a particular way to contact with a perpetrated parent, or you know, behavior at school that might be related to how other kids are responding to what has happened. You know, not everybody is able to verbalize that all the time, but it may show in other ways, in sleep problems or in behavioral ways. So yeah, that trying to tune in into what a child needs, and also to keep doing it over time. Like the answer today may be very different from the answer in a year from now of what a child wants and needs, and both Joe and Catherine have touched on that.
Thank you for that, Ava. That was very helpful. And I'd like to give the last word to Catherine. So Joe, I'm going to come to you next with this question, which relates to and sort of segues nicely from Ava's most recent comments in terms of how can practitioners, what supports can we give practitioners to give this child-centred approach when they're working with and supporting young people in their mental health and wellbeing, where they've been exposed to distressing situations and information?
What supports do practitioners need when they're?
Yes, that's correct. The questioner asks about the supports that practitioners can use or access when they're working with young people to support their mental health and wellbeing, and doing so in that child-centred way, as Ava mentioned.
Well, I think these are meaning-making experiences. What the practitioner is needing to do is support the child, young person, the family, the carers, the system, the networks of people around them to make sense of something that's very complicated to make sense of. And it's not just making sense of it as Ava just said, once. It's a sense-making process over time. So if that's the kind of focus of the work, then practitioners need that opportunity themselves to think about how does it impact on them? What are the world views that they're carrying which may be challenging for them in their work? What knowledge do they need to hold in order to be able to do this? How do they access the voices of children, young people and survivors of this experience to be able to be truly informed from that perspective that about their work and about how they're going about doing what they're doing? I mean, for me, it comes down to good quality supervision, using this topic in reflective practice forums that you might have with colleagues. And ultimately, it's about making sure that we don't fall into the trap that Catherine talked about, which was to make it harder for grief to be processed, to be understood, to be experienced, and for mourning to occur. Like, I think they're the things that hold children, young people and everyone involved around them, and we're the ones that sometimes get in the way of doing that, not just practitioners, adults. I mean.
Yes. And so, Catherine, I wonder if you may have any reflections on the supports that schools or other sectors that are not specialist family violence workers, what they could provide for children, this questioner has asked.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to put too much pressure on teachers because teachers already have so much pressure put on them to do kind of extra work. But I will say that teachers for me were like a hugely important place of safety at times, and witnessing. You know, school is where you spend every day, all day. You know, so in some ways, your teachers can be the people that know you in a particular way at different times more, you know, or see you more than anyone. So I do feel like there's opportunity for schools and teachers to be like a really supportive part of a child's like community. But I wouldn't want it just to feel like just them. I think that there's so much opportunity for I don't know, maybe like I think about peer support, how important, you know, friendships and just like your peers are at school, and how that can either be such a beautiful experience of support or the complete opposite. So I do feel like I think a lot about how we can kind of empower other young people to be part of a supportive community for each other. You know, I don't necessarily have the answers to like all that we need to do there, but I feel like, yeah, I think there's just so many opportunities for support and for different people, you know, depending on the kinds of communities you're in touch with. You know, for some people, their you know, church community might be a really important part of their life, or various kind of cultural yeah, like communities that are could potentially offer a lot of support. And I really believe in the power of community to kind of like be part of a supportive environment for young people, and they can also be the opposite. And so I think, yeah, I don't know, I think we just need to do more in general or all of us in the communities we're in, to think about the ways that we include children and young people generally, to see them as whole beings, not people becoming whole beings, you know, as adults. It's like, no, they already are. And instead of this kind of idea that children are sort of like inherently vulnerable, this sort of deficit model of like, we have to protect them because they're lacking in all of these things, actually just seeing the, you know, the wholeness of them as humans and including them in our communities in all kinds of ways. And I really feel like if we did that more, there would be more support for children and more space for children to feel safe and to have safer adults around them if they were kind of actually genuinely included within all our, you know, communities instead of excluded a lot of the time. So yeah, I'm not sure if that fully answers the question.
That's a wonderful sentiment. Wonderful sentiment to end on, Catherine. Thank you for that. Bringing the voices of children to the centre. And as we draw to a close now, I'd like to thank each of our presenters today, Catherine, Ava and Jo. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia, and particularly the Honourable Justice Jacoba Brash, for the assistance in relation to the information about the court's critical incident list. Thank you, of course, to our audience. And I'd like to also acknowledge and thank our AIFs communication team and the Child, Family and Evidence and Evaluation team for organising and producing today's webinar. And before we conclude, a reminder to subscribe to the AIFs newsletters to be notified about the recording and to complete our feedback survey. We look forward to joining you at our next webinar, and take care, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you. Welcome back to the extended question and answer session for this webinar. We're inundated with lots of questions, and we're going to take a moment to address some of these questions now. I'll begin with a very interesting question about how practitioners can navigate and support children with their relationship with the offending parent, and particularly considering the connection that that child may have with the parent and that parent being held accountable. And I might open it up to everybody, and we'll have a discussion about that topic, which we touched on in the course of our discussion in the webinar.
I mean, I can, yeah, I guess I think that, gosh, it's so dependent on the situation, firstly. I think that obviously being child informed, you know, obviously you want to be communicating with the child about how they're feeling and what they're thinking, and like Ava mentioned, you know, also seeing their responses and just like, yeah, I think that there's a lot of things that we have to take into account. Obviously, you're going to be thinking about things like safety, and sometimes children may want one thing that everybody else can see is actually not safe for them. So, you know, I think that that's going to come into it as well. I guess from my experience, I just want to say that it was helpful, or it has been helpful for me at times to, and throughout my childhood, there were times where it was really important for me to like not want my father in my life, to hate my father, to like feel all kinds of things about him, but also for him to still be seen as a human being and not just as a perpetrator, seen as like my father who could be really loving and kind, as well as behaving in ways that were not loving and were unsafe. And there's something for me around like still making sure that you see that person as a whole human as well. they might not be a safe person for that child, but just recognizing that for the child, that's still, they're going to have a lot of feelings about their parent, conflicting feelings, and potentially, yeah, still a lot of love. So I guess I don't have any easy answers for that, because I think it really depends on the situation. And I think Ava can speak a little bit to like broader studies on this with lots of young people and the reasons why they may choose to be in contact with their parent. But yeah, I think it's just trying to hold the complexity of it, and recognize that that's what a child is trying to do too. Like, just hold all of the things that they feel, which is just so many things. So if you can kind of accompany them in that holding, hopefully you can see a way forward that prioritizes their safety, of course, but also their connection and the humanity of all of the people involved. Yeah.
Yeah, from the research. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Ava.
From the research, indeed, we saw a variety of ways in which children and young people would go about this, and yeah, to me, really important that we acknowledge that some children may want contact, some children may not want contact, and that might change. For a number of children, it was very important that the parent showed remorse, and genuine remorse. That was, for some kids, really a condition to be willing to engage in contact. And all the things that Catherine said about safety being important, of course. As Catherine just mentioned, children may have different reasons why they want contact. So some of it may be around that connection, but some of it may not be about that at all. It may be about asking questions about the parent, the other parent who they have lost. So often the parent who has perpetrated the murder is the person who knows a lot about the other parent, and so holds answers to really important questions for the children. Sometimes they want to understand more about what happened, and it obviously depends on the parent's capacity to talk about that in a genuine way that's helpful for the child. And sometimes children want to understand better where they come from, like whether they are, well, there may be sometimes an implied concern about becoming similar to the parent or different. I know of one child who wanted to understand whether their musical talents came from their parents. So, you can be surprised by the reasons why children might want to have contact. And I also remember one child who said, well, I'm actually not sure. I think these days I do it more for my parent than for myself. And she was, yeah, again, also changing her perspective on that contact and what she wanted from it.
Yeah, I want to add, like, oh, sorry, Jane.
Oh, Catherine.
No, I mean, I guess this is it's a hard one for me to answer because I grew up with my father, and I don't think that it's probably less likely in a lot of cases that might happen these days. But so I think that's where it so depends on the situation, and there can be a number of different ways that someone may or may not be in contact with the perpetrating parent. Like, yeah.
I think the only thing I would add is two things. One is be sure to consider whether it's the child's agenda or someone else's agenda in the network, because often children can follow and be influenced heavily by other people who've got a different agenda or just an agenda for themselves that's not the child's, or that the child doesn't know that they want that one or not. And I think the second thing is that contact doesn't necessarily mean seeing them. You can communicate with a parent via a go-between, via letters, different forms of communication. So I think I would err on some staged processes to make sure that children are kept safe, and they're the ones who are helping to lead and others follow what the nature of the contact is and what they're trying to get at.
Yes, and to complicate things, sorry, there is also the consideration of those direct caregivers. I'm just thinking of the situation. I used to think very much only child-centered, and these days I'm starting to think also when caregivers are grandparents, for example, and you just see the grief that they are going through and what it means to them, I really wouldn't want to discount their view in the decision-making process. So yeah, it's just to say that it's something that requires very careful consideration and consultation with everybody, and totally agree with what Joe says about that there's so many different ways in which it can be done, and that can lead to more or less stress for everybody involved. I remember one situation where the parent would call on a Saturday, and for the whole family, the whole Saturday always revolved around that call that would happen when it would happen, and all the emotions with that. So basically half of the weekend was dominated. I mean, apart from how dominant such an event and everything, I mean, calling it an event is a weird thing. The homicide and the whole aftermath and fallout takes already in a child's life, but in this case, practically the way it was organized, it was just the weekend was never a free space to relax from things.
Very complex question.
And I remember that. Sorry, just quickly, I just some of the people that we've interviewed, and I kind of understand this experience of what, as well as people saying that, you know, it's not necessarily that we didn't want to have any contact with the perpetrating parent, but we just wanted that to be safe for us. And so often it didn't necessarily feel safe. So it's not as clear or binary, I suppose, as like yes contact or no contact, like Joe was saying. Like what is the nature of it, and how does it look and feel, and how is it organized so that you're not also putting extra stress or trauma onto a caregiver, or, you know, there's so many considerations.
And something that needs to be arranged or considered in relation to that individual child in each circumstance. So yes, very complex question, but thank you for exploring that with me. I think that was a very helpful discussion and enlightening discussion. The next question that we have is, how best should we support a child who has lost a parent in this way, who does not want to talk about this loss, or who says that they're okay? And Catherine, I wonder if you might begin with your insights on that particular question.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would say that, you know, depending on a child's age and developmental stage that they're in, like they're going to have different responses. And so it's not as though a child says that and that's forever, that then they're fine forever, you know. And I think that's really important. I feel like in my childhood there were plenty of times that had somebody sort of just come out and asked me as a child if I was okay, I actually would have been like, yeah, I'm fine. Like, you know. And then there were other times where the sort of cumulative impact of potentially not having a space to talk about it, or not really knowing having language to talk about it, or just a developmental stage that I got to meant that I was really suddenly not fine at all, you know. So I wouldn't want people to think just because a child is saying in that moment that they're fine, that means they'll be fine forever. And I'm hesitant to say, like, oh, of course they're not fine, because I think we do really need to listen to where kids are at. And there's also, yeah, different ways of processing things. There's different ages where you wouldn't directly just talk to a child about it. You would be thinking about other ways of connecting with that child and bringing them into a kind of like spaces where if they want to speak about those things, or if they want to convey something, that there are safe places to do that. So thinking about, you know, young children and things like play therapy, or even just like, yeah, including children in community in ways where there's a connection, because like I was saying, there's such disconnection and isolation in this experience. So I think that, like, you have to think about the child in relation to everyone around them as well, and just making sure that if the people around them are getting the support, so that when that child isn't okay, they have somewhere to go. So yeah, I think that's what comes to mind when I think about that.
And Jo and David, do you have any reflections in this regard?
I think often when people ask that question, it's because the timeframes that they have to work to. So they're saying, I can't get through to this child right now, and I've only got 3 months more. I've only got the 4 sessions to go. And so there's the being led by the child is not possible within that kind of support frame. So if that's the case, thinking about how you connect the child to the community, like Catherine said, what are the relationships that hold and support and accompany that child now and into the future might be the best that you can do. And alternatively, if you have some more time and time's not restricted, then it's as much about developing a relationship with that child in which the possibility of exploring it, verbally or otherwise, through play or through other kinds of opportunities, that the young person, the child, can start to make sense of it. But grief isn't something that happens in the counselling session, and mourning's not something that happens when you switch it on and switch it off at a particular time. So we're really talking about sense-making, meaning-making. And that's a process that happens with multiple people at multiple times throughout the development of a child. So for me, we have to understand what it is that's driving us to ask that question in the first place, so that we can find the right answer, which may be not our role.
Yeah, I agree with all that has been said, and I'm thinking of children, you know, again, may have different reasons why they say that they're fine, as Catherine also said. I feel that sometimes children might be fine indeed, and may just feel comfortable knowing that if they need in the future, they can reach out to this person and feel comfortable with that. And sometimes it may be clear to us or to a practitioner that the child is not fine and just saying that they're fine. And then, of course, we might try different ways of opening up that conversation, because you might have concerns about this, you know, a young person self-harming and really withdrawing. And in that case, we might want to find a way that make sure that the young person can express what is happening to them. And verbally may not be the answer. Maybe it is through play or art therapy or something else.
And also, like, recognizing that maybe you're not the right person for that child to be speaking to. You know, there might be very valid reasons why a child doesn't trust you. And I think it's not about taking it personally. It's really about finding the people in that child's life who they could trust, and maybe a different kind of practitioner, maybe who has someone who shares their cultural background, or, you know, there's all kinds of reasons why a child might not want to open up and might just say they're fine as well. So yeah, I think it's really about kind of finding the right supports and bringing those supports together, recognizing that that might not be you as well, you know.
Including at that particular point in time as well. So the timing that we all spoke about before as well. I think we have time for one last question. And this last question is, what are the core skills or services or counselling styles that Catherine found best supported them? Catherine, would you like to answer that?
I would love to, as someone who's been in therapy for my whole life, adult life. I mean, firstly, I just want to say that I think a group support group, you know, that kind of thing would have been so helpful, because again, it's that, like, it's so isolating, and I think the need for connection is really great, and when we individualize it, that can be more isolating. So, you know, any kind of like group support I think would be potentially really great, which unfortunately I haven't had. But in terms of just therapy styles and kind of practitioners, a couple of things. One, I have always really deeply appreciated practitioners who are very human in the room, you know, who are willing to be vulnerable themselves. I think when you've experienced something like this as a child and you've had such severed attachments, it's so important to, the relationship is so important. So it's not necessarily what you're talking about, it's actually the relationship between you and the practitioner or the therapist. That's always been so important to me, and it took me a really long time to figure that out, and also to feel okay with that. I had a lot of shame around like feeling like I really needed to be connected to my therapist, you know, and I've really come to realize that makes total sense. But yeah, I think something around a lot of trust being built, and just recognizing that the relationship is really important, which, I mean, we know anyway in lots of counseling that like the relationship is important, but I would say especially for people who have experienced something like this, where all of their relationships in some ways have been fractured, yeah, that's like a pretty key thing. The other thing I was going to say that has left my mind now. Yeah, maybe that's enough.
Well, thank you again, Catherine.
Oh, actually, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I remembered. Well, I think this is really, really depends on the person. So I'm going to speak just purely from what I noticed as somebody who often really intellectualized my pain. So I could often speak about what I was thinking or feeling, but I wasn't feeling it in my body because there was so much, it was so unsafe for my whole childhood to really feel the extent of what I was experiencing, especially living with my father. So I found that really like gentle introduction into more somatic kind of therapy and counseling was really helpful, but I would just say that was a very slow process. Yes.
Thank you again, Catherine, for being so open and for sharing your experiences and your knowledge and wisdom with us. Thank you, Ava and Joe, for your tremendous contributions also. And thank you again to the audience, and good afternoon.